Hi, everyone, and welcome to IDPro's webinar on the Body of Knowledge 101. Thank you so much for joining us. So today our speakers are Heather Flanagan, IDPro Principal Editor, and Heather Vescent, IDPro Executive Director and President. So first, we have a few housekeeping items. Please mute throughout the session and make sure to disable your video. If you have questions, please type them into the chat and we will address them at the end. And as always, please be respectful. Now I'll hand it over to Heather to get things started.
Great. I assume it's Heather Vescent you're handing it over to. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. And I even see some folks from Europe on here. So good evening. Thanks for joining in. You have the pleasure of double Heather this morning, this afternoon. Very happy to be handing things over to Heather Flanagan in just a moment. But prior to that, I wanted to kind of put some context around what the body of knowledge is and why it is important to IDPro. So in this session, what we're going to do, it's kind of the first session of its kind where I asked Heather Flanagan, I said, we get a lot of questions. There's a lot of folks interested in the body of knowledge, but what is it? So that's what we're gonna have her go through. But what is the point of IDPro? Why am I here? Why are you here? IDPro's mission is to globally foster ethics and excellence in the practice and profession of digital identity. There are a lot of identity communities and groups. They're focused on standards or specific technology implementations or associated with an organization or tech solution. But IDPro is the only organization that is focused on the profession of the identity practitioner. And we don't necessarily care about the specifics of a tech solution or a new technology that might be emerging. We're really about supporting you, the human being that has to go out and solve and develop and create some of these identity and access management solutions. So that's the purpose and the goal of IDPro. And we do that in 3 ways. So next slide, Heather. Our 3 pillars of supporting you are through vendor neutral learning materials. That is the body of knowledge. That's what we're going to be really covering in depth today. And this is educational. It is peer reviewed. It is free to anyone. You don't have to be a member. And this is one of the programs that we support financially when you are a member with IDPro, either an individual member or a corporate member. We also have our CIDPro certification, which the body of knowledge supports through education. But what the certification is kind of like, hey, this is the proof that I know what it takes to have this foundational knowledge to be a robust, good identity and access management provider. And then we also have our community. If you are a member already and you've hopefully joined the Slack channel, you can see it's a really nice, friendly, supportive community. It's our founder, Ian Glazier, calls it the ultimate phone a friend. And it's really a 2-way street. So if you've got questions or you're new to the space or you're new to a particular technology or trying to implement something new, you can ask for help. And all kinds of folks have all kinds of responses. And vice versa, when folks are asking for your opinions or your help, you can chime in with your best practices, or as someone said, I think recently, is we all have our little kind of like pet peeve or our little like thing we're going to super geek out on and have very strong opinions of. And it's just a really fun, respectful community where we can have those types of conversations. But you don't get all that value out unless you join and you become a member. So IDPro is really about you get out what you put in. So anyway, I'm going to pass it over to Heather Flanagan to really dig into this like top of the pillar here, top of the triangle, this vendor neutral learning materials, this body of knowledge. And I hope that today you will get some understanding, some background on this program that we've been doing for many years. And if you're so inclined, we'd love to have your help. There are a couple ways you can participate. You can write an article or co-write an article. And if that might seem like a bit much, we also have reviews. And then if you want to get more involved, there's always opportunities for you to volunteer onto the committee. So keep those in mind as Heather goes through the rest of the program. So if you're good, Heather, I'll pass the baton to you.
Whoosh, I've got it. Okay. Good morning. So the IDPro Body of Knowledge is pretty simply a resource for people interested in the identity and access management space. The articles are written and reviewed by IAM practitioners, and they're all volunteers who've committed time and brain cells to improving just the industry overall. So many of you are probably familiar at this point with IDPro's origin story. Ian Glazer and Sarah Cacchetti came up with the idea for this organization because they saw how important digital identities are in the world. And the people who work in that space, you people, needed a community to help them share knowledge and understand the best practices in the IAM industry. So the Body of Knowledge is one component of that. Material by and for IAM practitioners to help them achieve their goals and feel proficient in their careers. And if you've ever listened to any of the skills survey work, you'll know that feeling proficient is a long journey for most of us. It takes a couple of years to feel like you've got any kind of grasp on the complexities of identity and access management. So lovely. Where can you see this glorious piece of work? So the main landing page for the Body of Knowledge is, as one might expect, via the IDPro website. It's pretty straightforward, idpro.org/body of knowledge. But wait, there's more. We also have a GitHub repository that holds the markdown copies of articles so that people can see how the content evolves over time, add issues if they see something wrong, or offer a comment where they feel like something might need elaboration. Oops, too far. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the vision of the organization. The Body of Knowledge program itself has a very dedicated mission to develop and provide resources for the education and career advancement of identity professionals worldwide. So you can read the charter online. If you go to the Body of Knowledge landing page, you'll find it. You'll find a couple other things too. So when did it all start? When did the glint in the eye happen? So this was pretty early on in the existence of IDPro. The Body of Knowledge Committee, which exists to provide both strategic oversight for the Body of Knowledge and immediate support as one of the reviewing bodies for articles, they kicked off in the late 2017. So their first job was to figure out what they even wanted in a body of knowledge. So they created this like ideal table of contents that captured and organized topics that they felt needed to be covered in a, what would this look like when it was done? And once they had iterated on that a little bit, they realized they needed hands-on to develop a publication process, including formal editorial support. And that's where I came in early 2019. Took about a year to get the process sorted and our first articles out the door. Our first collection of articles was published in March 2020. Since then, we've published 9 collections, or issues as we call them, which adds up to about 24 new articles, and I've lost count of how many articles we've refreshed over time. So I expect some of you are often motivated by numbers, like how much is this thing even used, and all those other good notes. I have numbers for you. So at least as of this summer, there were 25 new articles. That added up to about 60,000 views since the first one was published, about 10,000 downloads, and roughly 145 countries overall over time, actually looking at the articles. The single most popular article to date is the Introduction to IAM Architecture by Andrew Cameron and Graham Williamson. I think that had almost twice as many views as any other article that we've actually ever had. The Other articles, topics range from access control, which I'm sure you will agree is kind of an important part of identity, architecture, standards and laws, specifics about digital identity and the life cycle, even non-human accounts. Now for my favorite thing, and that's the actual process that we go through. So we go through, 3 or 4 cycles per year. Ideally, I would love for this to be quarterly, but a lot depends on how many articles are actually submitted and what we actually accept. So it generally starts with someone saying, I have an idea, I have a topic I want to write about. They often write in collaboration. That usually works best for most people, but not everybody does that. And they iterate on something. We have a Google Drive space, which they are more than welcome to use, but not required. Once that's been sorted and they feel like they've reached where they want to be with their article, and they may, they've generally talked to me about it. I've often put eyes on it and tried to offer some guidelines as to whether the topic was coherent all the way through, the logical expression was sorted out, anything I can do to help them, pointing them to references. At that point, they will submit it via the bok.idpro.org address. And I'm going to get a little bit more into the mechanics behind that submission process in a minute. Once I have the article in my, grubby little digital paws, I start the peer review process where I find other identity management practitioners and say, would you please review these articles? And I give them some criteria, some guidelines as to what I'm looking for. I'm looking for subject matter expertise. I'm not worried at this point about are all the commas in the right place. I'm not worried about spelling. I'm literally worried about is the subject correct? And that's where the peer reviewers come in and offer me a lot of feedback. And we don't do blind reviews. The peer reviews I do share with the authors, and I've seen many solid collaborations come out of that as people have some really healthy discussions that improve the article overall. Depending on the feedback, it may go through a second round of peer review. If a whole lot had to change in the article, I will generally want another set of eyes on it. And then I can really start working on the editorial process and, making sure that the commas are in the right place and all the spelling is sorted out and all those, that the styling is correct such that screen readers would be able to read an article. Ultimately, there's a lot of mechanical details that have to happen. Once all that's done, the subject matter experts have signed off on it. The author, has made their edits. Then I take it to the Body of Knowledge Committee and the IDPro board, and I ask them 2 separate questions. I ask the Body of Knowledge Committee, does this article fit in what we're trying to do with the body of knowledge? At this point, I'm not asking them generally for subject matter expertise, though I often get that kind of feedback from them. I want that sort of strategic direction. Is this article the right fit for what we're trying to accomplish? Yes or no? The board gets a different question because they're the board. What I ask the board is this article suitable with regards to IDPro's reputation? If we publish this, are we going to look ridiculous? Something like that. And they will chime in on that. And they're very good about sticking to the question that I asked them, though if they see something egregiously wrong, they will of course speak up. Once we get through that, I have final sign off and I can go ahead and get the article published. Once the article is published, there is still more to do because at this point, my dearest hope is that the community will start to look at it and offer commentary. The place to do that is in our GitHub repository, and that way all the comments are public where people can actually put those in, and when the article is reviewed, which is now we get to the next step, after 1 year, I ask for a slightly different kind of peer review. I ask for a refresh review. And the questions I'm asking are, is the material still correct? Is the material still valid? Or, is it time to retire the article? If there's information in the GitHub repository that absolutely goes into this, the initial authors are the ones that are encouraged to hold the pen, but if they are unwilling or unable for some reason to do that, then I will do what I can with the Body of Knowledge Committee support to update the article or pull it if necessary. So articles are covered by a CC BY non-commercial, no derivatives international license. Now, what does that mean? Well, for one thing, it does mean that the articles are free and will always be free. But it also means that you must give appropriate credit when you reference them or when you use them. You have to provide a link to the license, indicate if changes were made. You're not allowed to use the material for commercial purposes. So no publishing it in a fancy book and selling the book. That would be bad. And if you remix the material or do something else with it, then you can't distribute that modified material. The point here is that the material needs to be always freely available. And given the level of review that we've sent it through, we don't want to see it changed outside of our own process. Copyright itself is owned by the authors and IDPro, and you can read about what that means in our IPR policy. So it generally takes me actually a couple hours to get through an article once it's time for publication, because there's a lot I need to do. And I have a system that helps me with that. Being an editor with a big E, editor, capital E, is so much more than actually copy editing articles. There needs to be a record of what's been done to each article from the point where the article was submitted and the author accepted the IPR rules to the point where I published the article and digital object identifiers or DOIs are assigned. We're using an open source platform called Janeway. This was designed for open access journals, basically journals that were meant to be freely available to the community, but have a rigorous behind the scenes process to get to publication. Why go through all of this when you might be able to do something like a Excel spreadsheet or something and keep track of everything? Well, because really the succession planning is important. And this platform makes it possible for people to come in after me and just keep the process going for the body of knowledge. Janeway also it's a huge help for more than just the process management. It natively offers support for dyslexic readers. It does really well at handling the styling for screen readers, and it allows me to upload accessible PDF copies, which I generate for download. Those are also called galleys. So accessibility is designed into the system from very, very early on. I mean, it's part of the getting these articles published is making sure they are as accessible as we can make them. So goals and how can you help? Because at the end of the day, this is by you, this is for you. And that means I need you. With the body of knowledge being for IAM practitioners, I'm always looking for people willing to write. The table of contents, it's been expanded since that first copy in 2018, and you can find it in our GitHub repository. I have writing advice on the bok.idpro.org website itself, which is the landing page to the Janeway system, as opposed to the pretty landing page for the articles themselves. And I'm always willing to coach people on how to get started. If you've ever been faced with what we call the blank page syndrome, where you're like, okay, I'm willing to write, I just don't even know where to start, you are not alone. Getting started is always the hardest part, and I am happy to help you brainstorm and help you get started with an outline. Because if you do nothing else, when you if you take nothing else away from this other than how can I get started, start with an outline. Always start with an outline. It's the best way to keep your thoughts organized. So, all right, I'm sure you would like some examples of what kinds of things am I looking for. So again, look at the table of contents in GitHub for that full list, but definitely interested in things like, okay, how does digital identity engage with shared devices? This would be articles that include information on, what is best practice for login, log out, MFA experiences for households that share a single device or community that might share a single device. I have I think I would take it past pet peeve to just downright soapboxy that a lot of what I see these days works under the assumption of everybody has more than one device and everybody has their own device and the internet is stable and fast. And if you travel outside of Europe, the US, head to the African continent, head to South America, head to Southeast Asia, and you're going to find a really different environment. And we're writing for them too. It's a global resource. And so some of these problems are ones that we really need to capture and say, here's what best practice is in this space. I'm interested in, describing the use case of, what would it look like given a specific architecture for identity and access management? What does integration with social media look like? We have a use case article for integrating with SAML. It would be neat to see something for integrating with social media, or then integrating with OpenID Connect, or, there's a lot of different things that you can start to drill down and just focus on the one thing. Looking for an article on, we've got the digital identity lifecycle. It's sort of an introduction to that. But every single phase has its own details, its own implications, its own difficulties, and we would like to capture those in their own articles. Another example is authentication policies and governance. I know many people were at the Authenticate conference last week and talking about authentication and strong authentication and different flavors of MFA and how governance enters into some of this. Having an article on the implications of managing those policies for different groups of people and describing, what does strong authentication mean versus authentication. Those would be really, really great things to have in the body of knowledge. So it's not all sunshine and bunnies. We have a lot of challenges. As I mentioned, the blank page syndrome, but there's also what people have been taught in much of their writing careers as professionals these days is really more towards blog posts. These are not blog posts. This is original content. It's actually a little bit more academic in tone because we're hoping that you point to references, other resources. These articles, among other things, are to be useful for the certification program. They're supposed to be useful at any stage for someone to learn, but we're also depending on them to support the questions in a certification program. So that's often very intimidating, and it causes a certain amount of inertia when people start to write and they're like, wait, I haven't had to write a research paper since college. Do I have to do this now? It's what we're after though. We have to strike a balance between speed, like, okay, if you got an idea, give it to me. And, all topics are accepted, not necessarily all articles, but if you want to write on something, let me know and we can work on it, versus thank you, that's a great idea, but no, I'm after this type of article right now, right? Trying to balance that. Ideally, I would be going through the table of contents and checking things off the list, saying, I want this, and I assign it to you, and I want that, and I assign it to you. That's not practical in a volunteer organization, so we have to balance that. There's a lot of people out there who have all sorts of experience in IAM, but they don't quite understand why and how an article could be used to support certification. So they don't have that the expertise to understand you're essentially trying to teach someone something, and it changes the tone of an article, and I think a lot of people struggle with that. And I've mentioned that people are much more comfortable with casual writing styles as opposed to the more rigorous and as a result, time-consuming approach. So all these things require a little bit of balance, and I'm sure that balance will change over time as we have more articles and the writers have more experience. So you want to get engaged, right? So you have options. You can engage as an author if you're interested in writing contact me and just let me know what you're thinking, and we can talk about how we could make that work, what an article could look like, whether you're actually thinking of more than one article, because sometimes people come with such a big idea. My response is, that's great, let's carve it up into more consumable chunks, where those consumable chunks are not just consumable for the person who's interested in writing, but they're also consumable for the reader. We don't want articles to be much more than 10 pages if we can avoid it, because people, they've got other things to do, and trying to get through a book on a topic as opposed to keeping a really clear focus, really clear scope on an article is frankly a lot more helpful to the practitioner today. If that sounds a little bit much, I understand. We're also looking for peer reviewers, people who are interested in offering their expertise in reviewing an article and saying, it would be better if you expanded this. I think this part is wrong. I didn't even understand the article. I get that sometimes too. Having enough reviewers is always really, really important. So if that's how you would like to approach it, even just to start there to say, well, let me see what other articles come in, that would be great. And there's a link there for how you can register to be a reviewer. If you're really interested in the strategic direction of it all, that's good too. Because the Body of Knowledge Committee, we're always welcome to have folks there and offer their expertise. We do alternate the meetings between more Atlantic friendly times versus Pacific friendly times. If this is something you're interested in, reach out to me. I can tell you that the work surges the closer we get towards our ideal publication date, the more work you have to do, because more articles will be coming in to be reviewed with the lens that you and the committee would have of, does this article fit in the body of knowledge? We kind of duplicated that. Let's keep going. So with that, if you have any questions, I love to answer questions. And I will ask Nolan to help me out here. Did any questions come in?
So I have a couple questions here that I wanted to ask for you. The first one is, if people are uncomfortable with writing, what would you say is the best way to get started? I know you shared a bit on an outline and such, but if you could dive into that a little bit more, that'd be awesome.
So if I were queen of the universe, and I felt that the need to write something, I would go to that table of contents, and I would look for something that actually had an abstract that spurred me to think, to say, you know what, I have opinions on this particular topic. Start with that abstract, and from there, create the outline of what you would want to say. Okay, you want to introduce the topic. You're going to have a place for terminology, because that's a huge aspect of each article. Every article has a terminology section, and every entry in those terminology sections is pulled into a consolidated terminology document, so that it acts almost like a glossary. But one of the things I think is most valuable about it is that if different authors have described a term slightly differently, you can see why in context that term was used differently, because there's a link to where it came from in each and every article. So you have your introduction, you have your terminology, and then you just try and think logically of, you start with your topic, you narrow it down into logical components, and then you end with, as they say, what you just told them. Tell them what you're going to tell them the thing, tell them what you told them. I live by index cards, to be honest, or if I don't actually have physical cards, I work with a Miro board to just throw my ideas and then put them in my outline. I know other people work with mind maps and find those really useful. If you really, really struggle, find a collaborator. That's the other big thing that can help a whole lot. If you have someone to bounce ideas off of rather than listening to the echo chamber in your head, that can help. If you can't find a collaborator but still want a sounding board, contact me, and I'm happy to be of assistance.
Awesome. The next question is, what is the difference between a body of knowledge article and a blog?
I love that question. That's a great question. So IDPro has a newsletter, which acts as in a way a lot includes a lot of things like blog posts and whatnot. A blog post is more like a well-written opinion piece, an op-ed piece, if you're into the old newspapers and whatnot. This is something where you're going to talk about your specific experience, possibly with a specific product, with it's about you. It's also informal, in that you'll use a lot more contractions, like instead of saying they are, you might say they're, or instead of saying it is, you might say it's. Just a lot of little things to make it to that level of informality, much more socially engaging as opposed to intellectually engaging. The body of knowledge articles, I don't want them to be dry, boring reading, because then no one will read them, but they are a little bit more rigorous in terms of how the content is presented. There's a very strong focus on the vendor neutrality component of it, pointing to other resources to help back up what you're saying. If you said in a body of knowledge article, everybody knows that MFA is the best practice, I would actually come back and say, can you prove that? Where is there a reference that supports that statement? Who is everyone? Is all MFA created equal? There's so much to that one statement that you have to pry apart for a body of knowledge article, whereas in a blog, that might be a perfectly reasonable thing to say.
Perfect. And then I had another question come through. Where can we see the idea list of body of knowledge articles yet to be written? Is this on the body of knowledge GitHub?
It is. Okay, so in chat, there is a link to the how do we put it? The TOC-volume1.pdf. That's the current what I'm looking for in the first volume. I should explain that. Taking a step back. My expectation is that when the body of knowledge will be complete for the foundational knowledge in the identity and access management space at some point. And when it is, I'm going to collect that into volume 1. That's not the only stuff we need to know about. There's the 201 level, the more advanced class, the more industry specific information. And that would go into a volume 2. Volume 2 is purely a glint in my eye. If you're curious as to where I'm thinking that's going to go, we do have the start of a TOC-volume2.pdf. Well, we're not there yet. We're so not there yet. But I don't want to lose the thinking of it, so it exists. In the meantime, where you can find what we're looking for right now is in that TOC-volume1.pdf. If an article has already been published, it's there. I've actually annotated each entry with a note that it was published, and then the actual link to the article and the actual abstract that was used. If that link isn't there, if it doesn't say it was published, then it wasn't published, and it's open for new articles. I do see a question came in that someone said, if someone wanted to take the certification exam, would the existing body of knowledge be enough to pass? I would say no. No, not yet. There is a, if you go to the IDPro webpage and you look at the drop-down menu for certification, you'll see a resource list. So the body of knowledge is kind of assumed that that's part of it, right? I would say it's necessary but not sufficient. But there's more, and that resource list will guide you to the other resources that are currently supporting the certification exam. And where I say supporting, I mean when you write an exam question, that answer has to be more than someone's opinion. It has to be backed up by some source of truth. And part of the criteria for the source of truth for the IDPro certification exam was that the material had to be publicly available. So, so you will see more. How do I get there from here? Well, that's why I am hoping to get more authors and providing that list of, and here's what we're looking for. If we ever complete volume 1, and I'm sure that we will, then it becomes the complete source for the foundational exam for IDPro. Well, it sounds like we're going to have a CIDPro webinar next month, and that's going to go into some of the preparation guidelines. So that's pretty cool. And there will be some new resources that will be announced then, I think.
Does anyone else have any questions before we move on? All right, Heather, I think I can pass it back to you.
Which Heather?
Right. Heather Flanagan, back to you.
All right. So that pretty much covers where we are with the body of knowledge. I am always happy to chat about it. If you want to reach out to me, editor@idpro.org will do the trick. If you want to review the articles that have already been published, of course, you can go to the website, or you can go to our GitHub repository, add issues with your thoughts and comments. We truly do like that very much. And with that, I think that's everything we have today. I hope this was useful to you. And I hope to have my email box full of people interested in writing for the body of knowledge.
Awesome. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We plan on making this recording available, and more information is on the body of knowledge is available on our website, idpro.org. And thank you again for joining us.